Our next and final speaker in this pre-breaking up into the discussion groups will be the acting deputy director of the Arlington Economic Development Department to really hone in on Arlington's efforts to increase our economic base. Alex Imes. Alex.
Good evening, my name is Alex Imes, and I'm the Deputy Director at Arlington Economic Development. Just to clarify, Victor Hoskins will be speaking immediately after me. There's a transition slide, and so I will turn it over to him at some point. I promise Masood and Terry, I haven't been hiding this from you. It came my way in the audience, so I'm going to attempt to turn over my own slides here. What I'd like to do tonight is to provide you all with some units of measure and some Arlington-specific context for the numbers that you read about, some of the common stories, the 20% vacancy rate, and generally try to provide you with some quantitative ways forward as you think about your study. So let's just get right into it. Kind of lead with some of the conclusive information here. And at the last meeting, it was asked, how much does each percentage point of office occupancy contribute to the local tax base? And the answer is about $3.4 million on a sample 400,000 square foot building. We chose 400,000 square feet because that's about 1/10 of our total office inventory, and so it makes a neat way to slide up and down the scale. For example, if you were to multiply by 10, then you know that that's about $34 million, and kind of called that out on the next slide. A vacant building actually does generate some revenue, as you'll see here on the right-hand part of the slide. The improvements in the land are worth something, but it's really the occupancy that drives the value. Just reiterating the importance of the performance of the office market, the vacancy rate right now is 10 percentage points above its 15-year historical average and higher than it's been in most any year in our history in any given year over the last 20 years. So an improvement in 10% occupancy would represent $34 million annually in local tax revenues. So that would be a great natural resource to mine here and a great way to bolster our budget. However, the challenge is that to get that 10% back and thus drive our office vacancy rate down to 10% from the current 20%, we would need to fill 4.4 million square feet of the space that's currently vacant. Now, how hard is that? Well, the entire region is projected to add 3.6 million square feet of office per year over the next 2 years. The region is in kind of a down cycle, so this isn't exactly typical, but it shows the magnitude of the challenge here in the near term, and even if the regional performance were to tick up a bit, how significant the challenge remains. Here's a scenario, and on the left-hand side we've illustrated our 4.4 million square foot vacant building, and looking across some illustrative performance levels. So our average capture of the regional demand in this example, 3.6 million square feet of net absorption is 5%. So if we get 5% of that 3.6 million, we get 180,000 square feet. And that's how much we've chipped away at the goal. If we double our average capture to 10%, then we get 360,000 square feet. And you can see again how much we've chipped away at the goal. If we achieve our pre-BRAC, which is base realignment and closure, average of about 500,000 square feet of office absorption per year, we would increase office occupancy by 1.25 percentage points, and we would get about $4.25 million in local tax revenues per year. Now, let's say that regional demand doubles to 7.2 million square feet per year, and the projections are either wrong, or after the 2 years of 3.6, the region starts to do a bit better and better after that and gets up to this scenario of 7.2 million square feet per year. Our average capture of the regional demand is 5%, and in this case, that would be 360,000 square feet. 10% would be 720,000 square feet. And if you go all the way up to what we were able to accomplish in some of our best years in this county, looking back at a blended average of the 5 best performing years out of the last 10, it's 900,000 square feet of net absorption. And that would create a 2.25% increase in the office occupancy and an additional $7.7 million in local tax revenues per year. So I hope that that gives some context around the challenge that we have, but also the opportunity that we have, I think, to enhance the revenue base. Now let's take a step back and look a little bit more at how the region has been performing and what some of the history looks like, what some of the recent history looks like. You can see that the last 4 years have not been going well for the DC area, and the blue bar, Arlington has had the negative office absorption to the tune of negative 3 million square feet. About 80% of that is federal agency loss. Here on the next slide, we get into, it's kind of a crazy slide, so bear with me, but you see the effects of BRAC and sequestration in the past 4 years. There's the 3 million square feet, 80% or 2.4 million square feet of that 3 million is federal related. And then you can see some of the other major movement in the market in the past. The Navy moving out in the 2001, and the Patent and Trademark Office in the mid-2000s, as well as some increase in net absorption at about the time that Homeland Security and other defense-related activities were ramping up. You also see on this slide the total vacancy. So we've obviously been on an upward journey there, again, from that quasi-historical average of about 10% to over 20% today. I think the exact figure is something like 21. It depends on the quarter and where we are. And then some of the averages over time, our pre-BRAC average absorption was that 500,000 square feet of absorption, and our total average over the 20-year period is 270,000 square feet of absorption if you include the negative activity in the past 4 years. Another challenge, that the positive absorption, so the level of tenants moving in, less the tenants moving out, has been in newer buildings. All of the positive absorption in the past 4 years is attributable to newer buildings, or buildings that were constructed in the year 2000 or later. So it's a challenge for us because so much of the space that was vacated during base realignment and closure that was formerly occupied by federal agencies tends to be older than that. So it kind of compounds what we're up against, and also means that we have to kind of keep up with either renovating older spaces to become more contemporary and placing new buildings strategically to attract the market. Federal lease holdings, this is just a zoom in on that figure, and the loss of the about 2.4 million square feet in their direct lease holdings, and a decline from 27% of the total rentable building area to 20% of rentable building area that they occupy directly. What's driving this beyond the federal repositioning? Workplace design efficiency. The culture of the firms that are coming into Arlington prefer a more open workspace, design efficiency measures that can result in 15 to 20% less space requirement for a given company. So that's obviously not working in our favor either, but those are the types of companies that we need to recruit. And so it takes running 1.5 times as hard to achieve the same result. And some of our historical advantages, we'll get to this in a few moments, in lease and tax rates have declined relative to other newer transit-oriented development submarkets and aggressive incentives in place by some of the neighboring jurisdictions. This is an illustrative view of what's happening. In the past, we had an office product or a set of office products that generally matched our tenant base composition and the workplace preferences of those tenants. And now we're in this transition period, again, with these compounding factors of federal repositioning, a new collection of regional TOD submarkets, an evolving tenant base, and the changing nature of the way that people do work. So in the future, we need to get back to balance. We'll have to offer a range of products and spaces that align with the transitions in the economic base and the transitions in the ways that people are working. Over the past year, we worked with the Economic Development Commission and a collection of business community representatives on something called the Future Office Market Study, and we were able to learn some very interesting things by going out and calling on companies all over Arlington that are either in some of the sectors that we're recruiting that are newer to us, and some of the sectors that we've had around here for a long time, contracting and so forth. And we just found, I just want to highlight a few of the findings and won't get completely into it, but that the adaptation of this existing building stock is already happening. We've had 1.9 million square feet in the past 3 years of office building stock that's either been transitioned to another use, that's been significantly upgraded, so they've taken a time out off the market for 3, 6, 9 months to completely refurbish and retool the property, or it's been there are buildings that are dark and waiting for a tenant that could spur a redevelopment on that parcel. Another point is that these legacy tenants, the government and contractors, still really matter a lot. They fill up 50% of the leased office space that we have, the private leased office space that we have in Arlington. So while we're moving on and incrementally transitioning into a more diversified tenant base, we still have to be very mindful of who's here and how much space they drive. Tenants greater than 150,000 square feet occupy 25% of the office space while making up just 1% of the company. So there's some really large users out there that are in the space. And as we recruit the newer tenants who are of a smaller size, again, we have to run a lot harder to fill the same amounts of space. And these tech-oriented companies in cybersecurity, education, healthcare are leading this flight to quality in the terms of the space and the tenant-based diversification. The next slide shows a sampling of sectors and companies that we've worked on over the past 7 or 8 years, and these represent many successes in our market and things to celebrate in the market. Over almost 2,500 jobs and 460,000 square feet. We just wanted to give you an idea of who's in this education, technology sector, healthcare technology, cybersecurity, data analytics, energy efficiency, and where they are in the county. Competitive setting. Now, this has been a topic of interest lately, and we've been doing some analysis in our office on this, and we've found some interesting things about where we stand, who our direct competition is, who's cheaper than us, who's more expensive, and who is right nearby us in the space, and what are they doing to try to gain a competitive advantage. So we plotted this on the basis of occupancy cost, which is the rent and the taxes, including income taxes, and the distance from the capital. So you have some of those DC area office submarkets that are closest to zero there on the left-hand side of the axes, and some of the farther out markets in Northern Virginia, Tysons Corner, Reston, that are quite a bit further from the capital. So you see that we're closest in the space to places like Capitol Riverfront near the baseball stadium, north of Massachusetts Avenue, north of Union Station area, downtown, and Bethesda. So in terms of who's our collective set, that's who we're closest to. Quick look at the Arlington occupancy costs, and then we'll get quickly into how we compare. But just wanted to note where the higher rents are in Arlington tend to be in Roslyn and Ballston, and then followed by Crystal City and Clarendon Courthouse. And they're relatively consistent across the Arlington submarkets, and obviously we, as economic development, we don't care where they go in Arlington, we just want them in Arlington. Arlington, even Roslyn, which is our most expensive when you stack everything up, is typically less expensive than the comparable DC submarkets until the incentives are applied. And what they're able to do in DC with things like income tax and other taxes, just to set those aside either for a period of time or on some scaling basis, so that in essence, just for example, the hatched area on the DC submarkets would disappear, at least for a period of time, and then our stack would be higher than theirs, and therefore they would have leveled the playing field in terms of the financial advantage that we may have otherwise enjoyed, and be able to attract or retain a tenant on the basis of them wanting to be in DC and be able to pay less. Now, we're typically more expensive than other Virginia submarkets, those who are farther away, like Tyson's Corner, like Reston. We're actually significantly more expensive than what's going on in Tyson's Corner right now once you factor in the concessions that are going into the rent packages. Reston performs a bit better that way. But this is for us to know that if we're in a competition with one of these areas, that we would have quite a bit of distance to make up, and maybe we would be better fishing elsewhere. It's not to say that we aren't competitive with them. We're very competitive with them because we offer what we believe to be a superior product closer in with more transit, more amenities, a 30-year head start, and so forth. But just purely in terms of cost, we now understand some of the deltas between, the Roslins, Ballstons, and the Tysons and Restons. And then Bethesda is relatively equivalent to our markets, and they're thinking a little bit differently now about how they're doing economic development as well, in Montgomery County anyway. With that, I am going to bring Victor up here to talk about the way forward. We've thrown out all of these complications and challenges, and Victor's been on the job 4 weeks, so obviously he's got it figured out.
Oh, goodness. What a challenge. So my slide's a little different from theirs. I, frankly, am a little bit more optimistic. I think there is a way forward. Did it move? There you go. This is my favorite slide, by the way. I watch a lot of National Geographic and Discovery Channel. This bear was sitting on the shoreline before he moved in to do this. This is how bears fish during the salmon run up in the Northwest. So if you can imagine this, we have been sitting on the side of the river watching these fish go by. That's really what's been happening. We didn't even know that there was a problem. Well, this guy figured it out. He said, I just need to position myself. So really, this is all about positioning. This is not overweighting in government. This is understanding that your salmon are running. So you got to go where the salmon are running. You have to go to the places where the salmon are. So let's talk about new businesses, diversification. If we do not diversify our economy, we're done. That's what the District of Columbia did starting in January 2011. That's when I joined the administration. We changed our focus. We changed the businesses that we went after. We changed the places that we hunted for businesses. That's what we're going to do here. Coronet, which is a gathering of about 2,500 corporate executives twice a year. They gather nationally and internationally. This is where all the big tenants are. This is where you troll for the whales. This is where you go for the big ones. ICSC, International Conference of Shopping Centers. This is where over 35,000 individuals come to talk about retail deals, either recruiting retailers or there as retailers. It is where the District of Columbia got a lot of its retailers that are now in city center and actually all over the city. We filled about almost 2 million square feet of retail space during the time that I was with either signed up or filled during the time I was in the District of Columbia. That was 40 months. That's a tremendous amount of retail space. And when you look at the number of sales that we recaptured for the city, it was a huge deal because they were shopping where? Crystal City, they were shopping in Bethesda. We had to change those shopping patterns. They didn't even have a Costco. They got a Costco now. A Costco with gas, which is even better. And we recruited them from ICSC. Select USA. Select USA is a gathering over 2,000 investors from around the world. The U.S. Department of Commerce sponsors this event, brings them all to one place. The great thing this year, right over in National Harbor. We could take the bus there. We can't take the metro, but we could definitely drive there. But it's where we're going to go after some international investors and companies to bring them to Arlington. South by Southwest. South by Southwest, that's that SXSW, so for those of you who aren't a millennial, I didn't know what it was, okay? Back in January of 2012, which I had been on the job a year, somebody said, hey, you gotta go to this thing, South by Southwest. This is one of my millennials. And I'm going like, well, what is that? And he just laughed. He spent maybe 5 minutes on the floor laughing at me. He goes, man, you are so out of it. And you know what? I didn't realize until I got there that I was really out of it. 50,000 people over 3 weeks, music, digital media, social media, ed tech, med tech, you name it, cyber. This is one of the more interesting things to do in a year. It's a great place to recruit companies. And we recruited about a dozen companies the first year we went, about 20 companies the second year, and the district is going its third year. We're going to go this year. And actually, Arlington has never been. By the way, Arlington hasn't been to ICSC in 10 years, has never been to Coronet in a major way, and has never been to Select USA or South by Southwest. So we're going into new markets. We're getting off the shore. We're positioning ourselves to get in front of these folks. And then we're going to do individual marketing missions to markets that we want to target. Like, markets that we want to target are like Boston. There are companies in Boston that we want here. Silicon Valley, some parts of Los Angeles. And then we're going to do regional work, meetups. You guys, anybody here familiar with meetups? Raise your hand. Wow, this is a hip crowd. I got to tell you, I had never heard of a meetup 3 years ago, and the first one I went to was absolutely mind-blowing for me. But it made me understand better the new millennial entrepreneurial spirit. And it is not just profit focused, it's also social focused, which is very interesting. Tandem NSI, that's going to continue to be very important for us because it deals with the national security cluster. And then we're going to continue to work with the we're going to start working with the economic development organizations in Northern Virginia and in Maryland. We actually have an event next week where I'm going to sit down with lunch with all the ED, economic development directors from Northern Virginia. And then we are actually going to work in cooperation with the District of Columbia and Prince George's County on the Select USA event. This is very different. This hasn't been done before. One of the things that I did when I was at the District of Columbia, I helped get an Air China route to land at Dulles Airport, and it's a route they had been working on for 15 years. And the way that I did it is I got my mayor to call your governor, which is now my governor, and have him contact your new Secretary of Economic Development, and it was one of the first deals that they did. We cut the ribbon. The inaugural flight was June 10th, and I left the office on June 11th, so I had to do that before I left. This tennis shoe here is very important. Let me tell you why it's important. It's a story behind it. So there were these two little boys in Western Maryland, and they were having a good time in the summer. They took off their shoes and just laying out, looking at the sky, calling animals out from the clouds, and they heard a big noise. And they looked around, and they heard it again. And one of the little boys stood up and looked across the field, and he saw a bear charging at them. He said, "Oh my God, there's a bear coming." And the other little boy started putting on one of his tennis shoes. And the boy that was standing up looked down at him and said, "Why are you putting on your tennis shoes? Ain't a man alive can outrun a bear." And he finished putting on his second tennis shoe and said, "Look, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you." Now see, that's understanding your competition. You really have to, if you're going to beat them, you have to understand them. So I'm very much into competition. And this is our competition right now. This is the landscape. You see that line of checks under DC? That's really tough to overcome. We're going to overcome it, but it's tough to overcome. They have grants, they have tax credits, they have partial tax exemptions, they have land write-downs, they have international offices. By the way, a lot of this stuff they didn't have before I got there, but that's why people hire me, because you want to change your position. Arlington, as you can see, we got 3 checks. That's a good place to start. We're going to reposition ourselves, but the thing that we have that DC doesn't have is an extremely powerful partner in the state of Virginia. And the state of Virginia, and actually the other economic development agencies, are our partners, and we need to figure out how to work together because we don't need to pursue the same fish. These are the low-cost, no-cost approaches, regulatory reform, speeding up your permit process. Do you know they have a one-stop center in Prince George's County? Do you know they have a one-stop center in the District of Columbia? Did you know you can submit your permits online in the District of Columbia? You never have to see a person. They will mark up your drawings, send them to you. You can remark them up and send them back to them and never leave your desk. It is a different world out there right now. They have the same thing in Montgomery County. We got to catch up with our competitors and how fast we move. In the expedited permit process for the kind of uses that we want. In DC, well, and actually in Chicago, they have this green thing. They call it the green lighting, where if you're going to do a green project, it zips past everything else. In DC, they give special priority to green projects that are LEED certified. Crowdsourcing for finding out what your community wants. This is something that's being used a lot in retail. I love this. I saw this one day. It was a big sign on the front of Retail Bay. It said, "What do you want here?" Hashtag tell me. And they got over, I think they got like, the first day they got 2,500 suggestions. And I think after a week, it was almost, I think it was like 8,000 suggestions. Anyway, from that, they decided what would go there. Guess what? It happened to be successful. So there are ways you can go about actually low cost, no cost, and actually making better decisions on where retailers go. And then creative placemaking. You've done a lot of that in Arlington, and we need to do more of that to attract the millennials. Here's the issue. In the marketplace right now, there's this marketing process you got to go through. People have to be aware of what you have. They have to understand what you have. They have to be committed to what you have, and then they have to sign a lease or take an action. We are at awareness, guys. We're at the beginning of this. It's going to take time, but it's going to happen fast. And with that, we'll bring it to questions.